Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. In today's video I'm going to be talking about how Lewis and I travelled from Melbourne, Australia to Bali, Indonesia. Okay, so the current time that I'm recording this is April 2022, so the restrictions may be a little bit different from when you're watching this, but I'm going to be talking about the challenges or the things that Lewis and I faced getting over to Bali and the actual process that it took to enter into Bali, Indonesia. So Lewis and I actually decided to travel to Bali, Indonesia for 1 month. Now, we had been pretty much locked down for 2 years in Melbourne and we were really missing that travel bug, and we just wanted to get out of our country, experience something new and do something a little bit different. So Lewis has the ability of working pretty much wherever. So he works for himself, and myself as a casual relief teacher, I unfortunately had to take 1 month, well not unfortunately, I had to take 1 month off from work so then we could travel over into this beautiful country. So the first decision was to come over to Bali for 28 days just to see what it's like, if we could maybe extend our stay another time in the future, just because every other time that I had been over to Bali was only around 7 to 10 days. So we thought that we would do something, you know, like kind of like a living the digital nomad life in Bali and see if we could actually do it. So we originally booked to arrive into Denpasar Airport on the 6th of April 2022, booked our flights, accommodation, travel insurance, everything was paid for, everything was all good. And then a week before departure, Lewis got COVID. So the rules at that point in time in Bali was that you had to have a PCR test on departure and on arrival, and obviously if you have COVID you are definitely going to test positive on a PCR test, usually within like the first week of having COVID. So that trip we had to cancel everything. We got vouchers for our flights, we got a credit for our accommodation, we got refunds for accommodation, and we just said, okay, well, when Lewis tests negative on PCRs, that's when we'll go, because at that time they weren't accepting certificate of recovery. And not like 2 or 3 days later, the restrictions changed to say, yes, you can actually enter into Bali with a certificate of recovery, which was just absolutely amazing. So as soon as that information came out and that it was legit and formal, we jumped straight onto Jetstar and booked flights to come to Bali. So we then booked for the 15th of April, and at that time they had actually dropped the PCR test on arrival. However, if you had had COVID and you were entering in with a certificate on arrival, you no longer had to do the PCR test on departure, but you had to do it on arrival. And if you hadn't had COVID and you were just entering in as a normal tourist, you had to do a PCR test on departure of your home country. So Lewis had to get a certificate of recovery from a general practitioner stating when he was infectious, and when his symptoms had stopped, and that he was no longer contagious and that he could travel. So all of that had to be explicitly in the certificate of recovery and very like straight to the point. So Lewis had to get the certificate, and then he also had to get a PCR test on arrival. Now for myself, because I haven't had COVID, I went and got a PCR test no more than 48 hours before departure from a pathology clinic. So that's really, really important, and we saw a few people at Melbourne Tullamarine Airport get stuck with just like going through the drive-through to get a PCR and like the text message results. That's not what is accepted. You have to go to an actual pathologist and pay for the test. So in Melbourne it's around $150, whereas in New South Wales I believe it's a little bit cheaper. Someone said it was like between 70 and 80. You can also get it done at the airport, but I think you have to pay for the 90-minute rush. And that also means that you have to get to the airport way earlier than probably what you had planned. So I had got my PCR test 48 hours before departure. It came back as negative, and we booked our flights. We had booked all of our accommodation. I'm sorry, actually that's a lie. We booked our first week of accommodation at this point because we just kind of wanted to get to Canggu and see what the vibe was like, where we wanted to stay and what we wanted to do. So entering into Bali, Indonesia, you need to present some sort of accommodation, and they're looking for just like one night of accommodation. And my recommendation is to have all of the documents printed. So no digital, no handing over your phone. They don't particularly like that. Everything printed. So all of your PCR tests printed, your certificate of recovery printed, all of that. So when you head into the airport, they may or may not ask for accommodation. We just had it printed and booked just in case, because we were hearing different things from both sides, that yes you did and then no you didn't. So we had our certificate, our PCRs, our accommodation, and also our return flights booked. So entering into Bali at this stage, you are only allowed to enter for 30 days upon arrival. If you want to extend it for 60 days, you can. You have to go through a visa agency. They will take your passports, deliver them to immigration, get your visa extended. There is a fee that goes along with it, but I'm not exactly sure how much it is. We are not doing that, so I'm not sure how much the fee is. And then they will return your passport with the extended visa. Now, it's at this moment, there is rumors that it is going to increase, but I'm not 100% sure. The visa when we entered into Bali was 50 Australian dollars or 500,000 IDR, which is 500,000 Indonesian rupiah. And you can either pay cash or you can pay card. I think that paying cash is a lot easier, just because with EFTPOS you do have to pay the EFTPOS fee, or there's some other sort of fees that go along with that. And if you want to extend, you can only extend it once for 60 days. And you cannot actually apply for an extended visa straight on arrival into Denpasar Airport. You have to go through an agency to do so. So when you arrive into Denpasar Airport and you have a certificate of recovery and you have to get a PCR, the PCR test costs around 275,000 IDR or $27.50 Australian dollars. Next thing is the travel insurance. So you have to have travel insurance in order to enter into Bali, and it has to cover at least, I think it's like the minimum of 20,000 Singapore dollars of COVID. So it has to have COVID cover, and it has to be at least a minimum of 20,000 Singapore dollars. They do check this, and they do obviously prefer printed copies of travel insurance. Our travel insurance costs around $353 for two of us for 30 days. So it is quite affordable, but it is one of those requirements that you must have in order to enter into Denpasar Airport. The other thing that they require you to do, which I'm going to say like require, because it's not like a proper requirement, is to download a particular app. And I'm going to leave the name of the app down below here because I don't want to mispronounce it or pronounce it incorrectly. And they do say that you have to download this app and fill in the profile. Lewis and I both did this back in Melbourne when we were going to leave like 2 weeks beforehand. And when you arrived into Denpasar Airport, you had to click on or scan a QR code to show that you had entered into Denpasar Airport. However, for us, the app wasn't working. We couldn't access the camera and it wasn't scanning the QR code, and there was pretty much no staff around Denpasar Airport to ask what to do. There was no one to help you. So we had to go and find someone and say to them, look, we've downloaded the app, we've done our profile, but it's not letting us scan the QR code. And they basically were just like, oh, no, just go. Like, they didn't check it. No one else has checked it since we've entered. I think it was only a requirement few weeks before that, because you had to upload your vaccination certificates and you had to be able to properly use it, which was a couple weeks or months ago. So I think that they're starting to slowly phase out this app. But if it is still in the requirements, yes, just download it. It's really easy. Just fill in your passport details, and that's kind of all that you need to put into your profile. The next thing that you have to download is your international vaccination certificate. This is really important, that it is the international vaccination certificate and not the state vaccination certificate. So there are two that you can download. One has this is just for Victorians, one has a green kind of like background with font and it looks really nice, whereas the international vaccination certificate is purely black and white with a QR code. It has to be that one, because then when you get to immigration, and Melbourne immigration as well, they scan it to show that it is legit and that it hasn't been tampered with. Again, this is something that needs to be printed and not in a digital form, because you need to present it to Australian immigration and also into the Indonesian immigration, and they much prefer printed copies. All of these things are super easy to do. It just obviously is going to cost a little bit of extra money to enter into Bali, Indonesia, with the PCR tests ranging from $27.50 on arrival if you're coming with a certificate, or $150 in Melbourne, Victoria if you are taking the PCR test on departure, as well as the visa on arrival, which is around $50 Australian, and your travel insurance, which is definitely a must as well. If you do have any questions about entering into Australia or any of the requirements, please make sure that you do leave them down below and I will do my very best to answer them. Also, if you have any questions about Bali that you're not really sure at, like areas to stay, things to do, that kind of stuff, also make sure that you leave those down below as well, because we've been here for around 2 and a bit weeks now, and I've really started to get a really good sense about what Canggu and Seminyak and all those areas are like. Also, please don't forget to give this video a big thumbs up and press that subscribe button down below as well, and I will see you in a video sometime in the very near future. Bye!